Hi, welcome to DevCentral. My name is Jason, and this is our State of the State Roundtable on iRules. And so today I've got with me Gary Genet. Gary, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
Excellent. And what do you do for F5?
I'm a product management engineer, so that means I make sure that when we deliver products, it actually solves problems in the real world.
Excellent. Okay. And also we have Eric Flores. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Jason?
Doing well. And so what is it that you do for F5?
So I'm a new product introduction engineer. So basically, I represent the support department in front of our product development department, and we're part of the design process to see how new features would be supported, how they would affect anything, how to affect the customer that would cause support calls, anything like that. And then we also train our support engineers once these new features come out.
So you're in the Skunkworks department of F5, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I kind of have 1 foot in support and 1 foot in PD, so it's really awesome.
Okay, cool. And of course, the community knows Kevin very well, but Kevin, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Thank you, Jason. Kevin Stewart here. I am a security architect of North America. Security architects are, we develop solutions that are, security focused, but we're also, on the sales side, we sort of interface with product management and sort of become the liaison between product management, product development, and the field engineers to help build interesting security solutions for the field.
Okay, great. Yeah, I use the word interface all the time when I talk with people, and my wife's like, you don't interface with people, you relate to people. It's like, no, I interface. So that's awesome. All right, so we're here to talk about iRules. We're kicking off Programmability Month, and of course we're going to kick that off with the bread and butter of what has, or at least what's been the bread and butter of the DevCentral community for many, many years is iRules. And so before we get into new features that we'll talk about a little bit later in the roundtable, I'd like to maybe go around the table, the virtual table that we have here, and just kind of talk about some of your experience with iRules as a solution. We've all done different things with iRules, and it's 12 years in for me. I remember back in '04 when Big IP 9.0 first came out, and we switched from the very simple proprietary rules that you could write on inbound connections only to really being able to manipulate traffic bidirectionally and kind of unleash some of the power on the network with iRules. So, and just one of you jump in and share some maybe some really cool things you've done or a couple lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, I'll take that one first. So I actually started with the company just a couple months before V9 launched, and I was in the support department. And so, making that transition to all of a sudden having this full proxy, having the power of being able to do whatever you wanted on the inbound, ingress, and egress, it was kind of a mind-blowing. That was very revolutionary. I would say what I've learned over the years, from a feature perspective, is not to box people in or prevent kind of protecting people from themselves. There's a number of areas that we initially inhibited in iRules, such as sockets, file system I/O. We really restricted some of the tickle language, and then later on we've had to re-enable some of those things. Like procs was a very notable re-addition to the language. So I think just my biggest takeaway is not to kind of protect people from themselves and let people do things that may not be smart, but could be powerful given a unique set of problems.
Okay, cool. What about you, Kevin?
I've always been sort of a protocol guy, right? So, I remember the V9 days I was a customer, and it was just a really interesting capability to be able to, talk protocol at the proxy layer. And the iRules language has really progressed considerably, just to the point where we've brought protocols to the common man, right? So it's one thing to be able to write an HTTP parser with layer 4 iRule commands, but now you have obviously you have HTTP iRules, you have SIP iRules, now we have WebSocket based iRules that really bring that in house and make it easier for somebody to actually write an application in iRules. It's pretty cool.
Cool. What about you, Eric?
So I actually got my start in iRules probably about 6 years ago as a customer. And initially it was doing some pretty simple things, rewriting headers or something like that. And then I've gotten to progressively more complicated things wherever they fit on the use case. And I would kind of say the biggest thing I've learned about iRules is it's kind of, I guess you could say, a glue. If the application can get you 45% of the way there and the big IP gets you the other 45% of the way there, then iRules can usually fill in that last 10%. Something that, because a lot of these things, a lot of the software that customers use will be off-the-shelf software, and they can't go have one little thing modified or changed by the vendor just to suit their needs. So a lot of the time, that's where iRules plays really plays or really adds value to the customer because they can do things they normally wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I had speaking of a kind of a glue or bug fixing. One of the things that kind of unleashed the power of iRules very early on for me is we had I don't know if it was a SharePoint site, but we had some Excel documents that were web hosted, and for whatever reason there was an update that essentially broke Excel in a way to where nobody could view any of the documents that were hosted online, even after they downloaded them. And there was some weird protocol issue with it, and with a few lines of code, just manipulating that payload as it came through, and it completely solved the problem. And it's like, wow, and stuff like that. And one of the first things that David Hansen was one of the core iRules developers years ago on the Big IP products, and his code name in the community was Unruly. And I had a remote desktop server farm, and we were where before the Big IP solution was load balancing outside of our load balancers because the way the session directory protocol works with the remote desktop protocol is it sends it directly to a server. At least that's how it was configured in the farm. And so if they lost a connection and it had to come back in the front door to the load balancing farm and it would hit the wrong server, that server would say, no, you really belong over here, but it would give the actual server address. And so we'd end up with sessions directly to servers, so the load balancing tier had no idea really what the traffic distribution was. And so I asked him the question, is there a way that we can send those cookies in the return traffic to analyze those and then rewrite that destination so it actually comes back into the load balancing tier, and then we can get it to the server itself? And like an hour later, David's like, oh yeah, totally possible, here's the code. I was like, wow. And it's like, it really opened my eyes, because at the time I was not even code at all. I mean, I did some embedded C in college, but pretty much I was hardcore network guy for the next 10 years. And so that really opened my eyes to really what the power that we had in the platform to be able to manipulate and change on the fly. So what about some? I'll start with one, and that's with knowing I have a problem, just jumping into the keyboard and starting to write code, and that for me has always been a big realization, and I do it sometimes today too, but I've gotten a lot better at okay, here's my problem, I've defined my problem. Now I'm actually going to go through some workflow and maybe even do some pseudocode before I start writing anything in the iRule, because I could get 200 lines into an iRule and say, what problem I solve? I don't even remember what problem I'm solving, and have to completely scrap all that code. And so, that'd probably be one of my biggest lessons that I've learned over the years is take a step back, actually look at the problem I'm trying to solve, and solve it with, an abstracted view of it before I start writing any code. What about you guys?
You know what? I would totally agree with you. I think that spending a lot of time on DevCentral, that a lot of times when you start asking more questions, you get down to a much simpler requirement than what's originally broadcasted, right? So I think probably the first thing that you do is to try to simplify what your requirements are, and then of course once you figured out what it is, if you haven't already solved it already, then go to the community and then lay it out.
Yeah, I tend to agree that I always try to. Big IP has a vast number of knobs and dials and configuration options and ways of accomplishing goals. I always try to find a way to get the problem solved using what's available before reaching to iRules. But it is nice to have it there as that final tool, because there are a number of instances where the only way to get at what you want is to kind of get under the covers. So it's nice to have that option.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes I like to
sure.
sometimes I like to start with flowcharts or something simple like that. So by the time I get to writing code, I'm not. I mean, I can add stuff as needed, but I'm not kind of going off on some tangent that I never recover from. And so by the time the iRules is done, it's exactly what I need it to be, not trying to solve 15 other problems at the same time as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, 12 years in, is iRules showing its age? Are we seeing any, in your experience in working with customers, Kevin or Gary, have you, is it showing its age, or are we losing functionality? Are we losing performance at this point?
Absolutely not. Sorry, I'm just going to jump in and take that. From a technology perspective, iRules is pretty much unmatched still. There are some of our competitors that have similar type functionality, but they don't quite have the breadth or depth, the same level of capabilities. When you say age, there is a subjective yes to that, in the sense that Tickle is a very well-established language. Some would say it's not quite as modern. It doesn't have a lot of the developer community and library support, but we're addressing that with deeper integrations with additional languages, starting with Node.js. I believe we're going to talk about the iRules LX feature in a little bit, so this might be a good segue for that. But I think we're going to be addressing that kind of any perception of it being an old or stale language. But as far as the capabilities it provides and the speed at which it provides those capabilities, I still haven't seen a replacement for it in the market. So by that definition, it's still cutting edge technology.
If anything, it's a stable language.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you mentioned iRules LX. We'll get there in a second. Before we get to make that transition to iRules LX, I wanted to kind of talk about, we just had a new feature release in 12.1 hit the release to web a couple weeks ago, and so is there anything in 12.1 that jumps out at you besides iRules LX for the community?
I'll jump in there on that one. I was just reviewing it a few days ago, and as an access and authentication security guy, I'm really excited about some of the per flow access stuff. The ability to drop in an iRule event at a per flow basis or a per request basis is really cool. That and the WebSocket stuff is just, I can think of a million things I can do with that.
Yeah. So what's a use case for the WebSocket stuff? So there's an entire new namespace, the WebSocket namespace. There's events and a ton of commands for it. A use case off the top of your head for that?
Just handling WebSockets the way you would handle any other protocol. Reading, pulling content from the payload from a WebSocket request like you can an HTTP request.
Yeah. I lose you there for a second. Okay, sorry. Sounded like you broke up there for a second, but yeah, you're right. So one of the other things I saw in there is the bot defense. There's an entire new namespace for bot defense as well. So a lot of cool things that you can do in there. There's yeah. So let's transition to iRules LX, because I don't want to make this too long. But iRules LX, Gary, you mentioned the addressing the dev community for iRules. So iRules, you're right. It's as performant, if not more, because it's really dependent on the hardware under it. It's no less performant from a technology perspective than it was. But there are some use cases to where iRules are not necessarily the answer, and so addressing some of that with iRules LX, that is what we're trying to address. So Eric, you want to introduce what iRules LX is?
Yes. So basically, like we said, we've had Tickle for about 12 years now, and I mean, Tickle's I guess I would say is no other competitors really have anything that comes to the level of that we've done iRules, but Tickle doesn't quite have the support of the community and the libraries that say Node.js or many other languages do. So now that we're incorporating Node.js, now we can bring a lot of that support, the community support, into the fold. So if anybody's ever done a protocol implementation in like something, sideband iRules, you're usually having to write it from scratch. Sometimes you can find examples on DevCentral and whatnot, but yeah, either way, it still ends up being a lot of work. So by bringing in something like Node.js, now you could go just npm install whatever, MySQL or LDAP and Radius, you name it. Now it's just there available with one command line, and now you have a whole library that abstracts all of those kind of gory details away from you. So you can go on to solving problems rather than trying to become a master of a certain protocol, which that opens up a great opportunity for not only for just our normal customer base, but also other people who the developer community or the DevOps community that will now they could start to write things that normally in Tickle, which normally your average developer is not going to be using Tickle on a daily basis. So this is great opportunities for that I think it opens up for us. Gary could probably expand on that some more because since he does all the product management stuff.
No, I think you guys both nailed it. It's just when you kind of earlier how I used the analogy of try to use a configuration and then iRules can take you that last little bit. I think that's what we're trying to accomplish with iRules LX. That when you get to the point where you're writing an iRule and you're looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of lines of code to parse some type of data format or do some type of protocol. Now you can just reach out and grab something off the shelf and then reduce the amount of burden that you have. And Tickle really doesn't provide that capability as a language and the community behind it. So reaching into the vast Node world gives us some additional power.
We'll expand on the MySQL use case there for a second. We used to have an individual at F5 who kind of maintained a MySQL iRule, and it was a massive iRule. But every time MySQL was released, it broke, tweak, and tune, and then they'd release again, and it would break, and he'd have to tweak and tune. So it was kind of this staggered, pain tolerance. And we do have some engineers like Nat who eat, breathe, and sleep protocols, and they would love to just regenerate every protocol that's in an RFC in an iRule, and that's fun for them. But it's very challenging to do that and expect to maintain it in a production environment. Whereas with iRules LX, if you have the MySQL plugin for Node.js, which by the way is provided by MySQL, you know that you're going to, depending on what version you're on, you're going to have something that's supported by the community, supported by some of these actual companies who are providing the product, and we don't have that in the iRules. They're not going to go learn Tickle to build that, but in an environment to where the community is so diverse and so broad, it just makes sense.
Yeah, especially really, really nice how, if you did have that SQL library or certain that SQL iRule, that thing is, what's the size of it? Like several hundred or 1,000 lines long,
It's
or
over
something like
1,000
that.
lines of code, yeah.
Yeah. Versus
it's very big. Yeah.
Yeah. Versus now in iRules LX, you can do a SQL query in like 20, 30 lines of Node.js code. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. It's like you don't have to worry anything anymore about the protocol implementation. You just basically say, db.query, and then you put your SQL query and escape any user input, and then you're on your way. It's great.
Yeah. So, Gary or Eric, can you guys talk about the architecture of iRules LX? Like, what does it look like from a GUI perspective? What does it look like under the hood? What can our users expect to experience with iRules LX?
So I guess I could take that one. So actually, we'll be releasing an articles here. I guess it'll be next week that will cover it in a bit more detail. But basically, right now, Node.js is out of band of TMM, or Traffic Management Microkernel, which is actually the part of Big IP that handles traffic. So keeping Node.js outside of that helps it to, one, that we can update it faster, things like that. So we still need to have iRules tickle to make a call over to the Node.js process. So there'll still be a little bit of tickle, and you might actually have to do, you probably will do a lot of the, I guess you could say, application logic of what you're trying to do still in tickle, and just leave the hardest parts up to Node.js. So, and that would be the things like the protocol implementations and any type of parsing or whatever that's really grueling to do in tickle.
Okay. And what about the GUI or any kind of IDE support for writing iRules LX? What does that look like?
So in the GUI, we actually have this concept called workspaces, and that has a built-in IDE, an HTML or JavaScript IDE. So you could go into your workspace, which we'll explain that a little bit more in the articles. But basically, you would have your tickle iRules and your Node.js code, and you have like features like autocomplete and syntax highlighting, but you have indentation, things like that. That you can just work on it in this one single workspace. So you could do both parts of your code. And then it also has the new features where it does offer, when you do an autocomplete and you put your mouse over a command, it'll actually expand and show you all the same documentation that we have on DevCentral, which is something customers have been really wanting for a long time, because now I don't have to go back and forth between DevCentral and my Big IP all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so and this is of course this is GA, or general availability in 12.1. So if you have 12.1, you can just hit your update on your license, and you should be good to go. Is that true?
That is absolutely correct. You do also need to provision it because we have the node processes that support the feature, and those, of course, consume some resources. So there is an entry in the provisioning table for iRules LX that enables that piece. But nothing actually happens with your device till you load up, as Eric said, a workspace that has a Node.js component to it. And then when you put that in, then those processes will be spun up and actually begin doing work.
Okay, cool. And yeah, and as Eric mentioned, we'll have an article series hitting DevCentral next week as part of Programmability Month. So look forward to that. And then any parting thoughts, you guys, that you want to mention, you want to share with the community about your experience with iRules? Should there be any concern for the community that classic iRules are going away?
Absolutely not. Want to be really clear about that. iRules LX is meant to be an additional technology, not a supplanting one. So iRules Tickle is very much cemented into our platform. TMM is a native Tickle interpreter. So iRules Tickle is always going to be there. iRules LX kind of represents our first foray into supporting other languages. And we are targeting for our next release. It's not guaranteed, but we are hoping to have what we're calling a flows feature, which will allow you to write natively JavaScript-based rules. Same thing as iRules LX. They won't necessarily be as performant as iRules Tickle, but iRules Tickle is always going to be there. We're just trying to provide some additional options so that Nat Thaddeus-Zirkhorn doesn't have to write thousands of lines of code to do MySQL anymore.
Good deal. Kevin, what about you? Any parting thoughts you want to share with the community?
What Gary said.
Yeah. I wanted to just throw up that softball, but yeah, iRules are not going away with the introduction of iRules LX. So fear not. So guys, thanks for joining me today. And this really is, other than the calendar, this is the kickoff for Programmability Month. So thanks for joining, and you'll see several of these faces throughout this month, either in print or in more videos. So thanks for joining, and appreciate you guys' time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.